dad said that to me, at his retirement party, in front of 80 people, and then he pushed me. I hit the hardwood floor in a navy blue dress that used to belong to my mother. She'd worn it to her last anniversary dinner before the cancer took her. I wore it that night to honor my father. I didn't know it would be the night he denied I existed. But what my dad didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that the real daughter he'd just handed my seat to had been stealing from him for 8 months, and my husband had the proof in his jacket pocket. But only if this story hits close to home. I'd love to know where you're listening from. My name is Heather, I'm 31, and this is the story of the night I almost lost my father forever. Let me take you back to 3 years before that party, the day everything started to fall apart. My dad, Richard Purcell, spent 35 years as a foreman at a manufacturing plant outside of Dayton, Ohio. He punched in at 6, punched out at 4, and spent his Saturdays dragging me around construction sites in steel-toed boots 2 sizes too big for my feet. He'd point at a beam and say, "See how that carries the load, Heather? Everything holds up something else." I was 9 years old, and I had no idea what he was talking about, but I listened. And years later, I became a structural engineer, and I finally understood what he'd been teaching me all along, that the things you can't see are the things keeping everything standing. My mom, Linda, was an ER nurse. She worked nights so she could be home when I got off the school bus. She smelled like antiseptic and lavender, and she sang off-key while she cooked, and she made our tiny kitchen feel like the warmest room in any house I've ever been in since. She and Dad built their life around a small oak table he'd made by hand the year I was born. 3 chairs, one for each of us. No one extra, no one missing, Dad used to say. Mom was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer when I was 11. She died 14 months later. I was 12. Dad didn't fall apart. At least not where I could see it. He kept going to work. He kept making dinner. He kept sitting at that oak table, in his chair, across from mine. Mom's chair stayed empty. I never asked him to leave it that way. He just did. For 3 years after she died, it was just the two of us. And the silence in that house was heavy, sure. But it was ours. Then Dad told me he'd met someone. He said she'd never replace Mom. I believed him. Victoria Ashford walked into our lives wearing a cream-colored cashmere wrap and a smile so practiced it could have been licensed. She was pretty, polished, divorced, and she had a daughter named Brooke who was 2 years younger than me. Dad introduced them over dinner at the house, our house, and Victoria brought a bottle of wine that probably cost more than everything in our refrigerator combined. I'll give her credit. In the beginning, she tried. She asked about my classes. She complimented the curtains Mom had picked out. She even offered to teach me how to drive, which Dad thought was generous. I said no thank you. I already had my permit. They got married when I was 15. Small ceremony. Victoria wore ivory. I wore the black dress Mom had bought me for 8th grade graduation because it was the only formal thing I owned. Nobody said anything about it. Within 6 months, things started to shift. Small things. Victoria replaced the oak table with a marble-top dining set. "Something more modern," she said. Dad agreed. The old table went to the garage. The first Thanksgiving after the wedding, I came downstairs and my chair, the one Dad had carved my initials into when I was 8, was gone. "We needed a matching set," Victoria said, smoothing a linen napkin across the new marble. Brooke moved in full-time around then. She took the guest room, which Victoria redecorated with sage wallpaper and a new vanity. Brooke was 13, chatty, eager. She called my dad Dad from the first week, and my dad, who hadn't cried once since my mother's funeral, got misty-eyed and hugged her at the dinner table. The new dinner table. I watched from the kitchen doorway and didn't say a word. That was my first mistake. I left for college at 18. Clemson. Structural engineering. Full ride on academic merit. Dad drove me to campus, helped me carry my boxes, and stood in the parking lot for a long time after I told him I'd be fine. Victoria stayed home. She said she had a migraine. Every time I came back for a break, something else had changed. Mom's photos migrated from the living room wall to the hallway, then to a shelf in the basement. Her recipe box disappeared from the kitchen counter. Her garden, the one she'd planted with coneflowers and black-eyed Susans the spring before she got sick, was pulled up and replaced with ornamental grasses that didn't bloom. My bedroom became Victoria's yoga studio. When I asked where my things were, she pointed to 3 cardboard boxes in the garage, stacked next to Dad's old oak table. We needed the space, sweetheart. Brooke's doing online classes and she needed a quiet room. Brooke already had a quiet room, but I didn't argue. That was the pattern. Victoria would take something small, frame it as practical, and Dad would go along because fighting about curtains and chairs felt beneath him. He was a foreman. He solved real problems, load-bearing problems. He didn't have the bandwidth for domestic politics. I met Marcus at a structural engineering conference when I was 25. He was a forensic accountant, presenting on construction fraud investigations. We talked for 3 hours about how numbers lie and how buildings don't. We married 2 years later, at a courthouse, with 12 guests. Dad came. He walked me down the aisle. Victoria came too. She developed a headache around the toasts, and they left before we cut the cake. The last time my father looked me in the eye, we were standing outside that courthouse. He squeezed my hand and said, "Your mom would have liked him." That was 4 years ago. 3 years before the retirement party, I was managing a bridge inspection in Tennessee when Christmas crept up on me. The project was behind schedule. The contractor had cut corners on the expansion joints, real load-bearing issues, the kind that kill people. And I couldn't leave until the county signed off on the remediation plan. I called Dad on December 23rd to explain. Voicemail. I left a message. "Hey Dad, I'm stuck on a job site. I'm so sorry I can't make it home for Christmas. I'll come in January. I love you. Merry Christmas." No callback. I figured he was disappointed. I texted him Christmas morning. No reply. I called again New Year's Day. Voicemail. I called the landline. Victoria answered. Her voice was cool and flat. "Heather, your father said he doesn't want to talk right now. I think you should respect that." So I did. I gave him space. I called again the next week, and the week after that, and every week for the next 3 years. 147 calls, 42 texts, not a single response. I never stopped trying. But I also never drove to the house and demanded answers. Twice I tried. Victoria met me at the door both times, arms crossed, same line. "He doesn't want to see you, Heather. Please stop making this harder than it has to be." I could have pushed past her. I could have caused a scene. But something in me wouldn't beg. If my father wanted to cut me out, I'd let him. It would wreck me, but I'd let him. That was my pride talking. And Victoria knew exactly how to use it. 8 weeks before the retirement party, Marcus got a phone call from a number he didn't recognize. A woman's voice, older, careful. "Is this Marcus Purcell? I'm Donna Webb. I work in benefits administration at your father-in-law's company. I need to talk to you about some paperwork." Marcus didn't tell me. Not yet. The invitation arrived in my work email. Not from Victoria, not from Dad, but from the company's event coordinator. A mass email to every employee's family contacts. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the retirement of Richard Purcell. 35 years of dedicated service. Willowbrook Country Club. Saturday, 6 p.m. Black tie optional." I stared at that email for 20 minutes. Marcus came into the kitchen, saw the screen, and sat down across from me. "You should go," he said. "He hasn't spoken to me in 3 years." "Which is exactly why you should go. This might be the only chance to see him in a room full of people." Something in the way Marcus said it, a room full of people, struck me as deliberate. But I didn't press him on it. I was too busy deciding what to wear. I chose the navy blue dress, Mom's dress. She'd worn it to her 20th wedding anniversary dinner, the last one before her diagnosis. It was simple. Boat neck, 3/4 sleeves, hem just below the knee. I'd had it taken in at the waist, but the fabric was still hers. The silk still carried the faintest smell of her perfume if I buried my face in the shoulder. I wore it for Dad, because Mom couldn't be there, and I wanted some part of her in the room. Marcus drove. Willowbrook Country Club sat at the end of a long private drive. Stone columns, golf course stretching into the dusk, valet parking. Inside, crystal chandeliers, linen tablecloths, a podium with a mounted photograph of Dad shaking hands with the company's CEO. Everything gleaming and expensive and staged. I found the seating chart near the entrance. My eyes scanned the head table. Richard Purcell, Victoria Purcell, Brooke Ashford, 3 senior colleagues. My name wasn't anywhere. Aunt Janet had been placed at the farthest table from the front, near the kitchen doors. I should have turned around right there. But I'd spent 3 years wondering whether my father still remembered my name. I needed to hear it from him, even if the answer destroyed me. Victoria met us just inside the foyer. She wore a charcoal Hermes scarf draped over a fitted black dress, and her smile landed on me like a camera flash, bright, blinding, and gone in a second. "Oh, Heather, I didn't think you'd actually come." "The invitation said family," I replied. "Of course." She touched my elbow and steered us through the main hall. Not toward the head table, not toward Dad. She guided us to a two-top near the back wall, the kind of table they set up when they've run out of room, wedged between a pillar and the service corridor. No nameplate, no centerpiece, just 2 chairs and a breadbasket. I sat down. Marcus sat across from me. Neither of us touched the bread. From there I could see my father. He was already seated at the head table, a Cartier watch catching the light on his wrist, a gift from Victoria for their 10th anniversary. Brooke sat at his right side, leaning into him, her hand resting on his arm. She wore a blush-colored cocktail dress and a Tiffany pendant, and her hair fell in perfect curls like she'd come straight from a salon. She looked like a daughter. She looked like she belonged. Dad glanced in my direction. For 1 second, our eyes met across the room. I waited for something. Recognition, guilt, confusion, anything. He turned away. Back to Brooke. Back to the table where my name didn't exist. A hand squeezed my shoulder. Aunt Janet. She'd crossed the entire room to reach us, weaving between tables with her reading glasses still on her head. She leaned down and whispered, close enough that I felt her breath on my ear. "I'm glad you came, honey. There are things you need to know." She squeezed my hand, and 4 words dropped into the space between us like stones into water. "They changed his papers." Before I could ask Janet what she meant, Victoria took the podium. She tapped the microphone twice and the room settled into silence. "Good evening, everyone. Tonight, we celebrate the most incredible man, husband, and father I've ever known, Richard Purcell." Applause. Victoria smiled. Behind her, a projector screen blinked to life with a slideshow. 35 years of Dad's career compressed into 100 photographs. Dad on the factory floor. Dad shaking hands with executives. Dad at company picnics. And then the family pictures started. Victoria and Richard at a vineyard. Brooke and Richard at a football game. Victoria, Brooke, and Richard posing on the porch of the house I grew up in. Photo after photo after photo. Not one image of me. Not one image of my mother. 35 years of my father's life, and Linda Purcell had been edited out entirely. As if she'd never existed. As if I'd never existed. Victoria turned back to the crowd. "And I want to give a special recognition to Richard's daughter, Brooke, his pride and joy, who has followed in his footsteps and made him so proud." Brooke stood up from the head table and gave a little wave. People clapped. I felt Marcus's hand tighten around mine under the table. A man approached us during the applause. Gray-haired, khakis, company polo. Phil. He'd worked with Dad for 20 years. He looked at me with furrowed brows. "Aren't you Heather? Rick talked about you all the time. Showed us your college graduation photo, your engineering license. What happened?" I opened my mouth, But nothing came out. I didn't know what had happened. That was the worst part. I had spent 3 years constructing an explanation. Dad was angry, Dad needed space, Dad moved on, and none of it held anymore. I don't know, I said, but I'm here to find out. The slideshow ended. The waitstaff began circulating with entrees. Conversations resumed. Victoria returned to the head table and placed her hand on Dad's shoulder like a claim stake. I set my napkin on the table and stood up. Marcus looked at me. Are you sure? I didn't drive 4 hours to eat bread rolls in a corner. I walked, straight through the center of the room, past Phil's table, past the middle managers and their wives, past the company VP, who paused mid-sentence to watch me go by. 80 people, and I felt every pair of eyes follow me like I was crossing a courtroom floor. The head table was elevated on a low platform, just 6 inches, but enough to make you feel like you were approaching a stage. I stepped up. Brooke saw me first. Her smile faltered. There was one empty chair at the table's far left. It belonged to a colleague who hadn't shown up. I stood beside it and rested my hand on the back. Dad. Richard looked up. His jaw tightened. It's been 3 years, I said. Can we talk? Silence at the head table. Victoria leaned in and whispered something to Richard. I couldn't hear it, but I watched his expression harden. Whatever she said reinforced the wall she'd spent 3 years building. Dad pushed his chair back and stood up. He was 6'1", broad-shouldered, and the foreman posture was still there even at 63. He looked down at me and I saw nothing. No warmth, no recognition, no conflict. Just a stranger wearing my father's face. For one fraction of a second, I thought he was going to hug me. He put both hands on my shoulders and pushed. I went backward off the platform. My heel caught the edge and I hit the floor, not gracefully, not dramatically, just hard. My hip struck the polished hardwood. The seam of Mom's dress split along the hem with a sound like a whisper tearing in half. That seat is for my real daughter. Dad's voice carried across the entire room. You lost the right to sit here when you turned your back on this family. Get out. I was on the floor, looking up at my father. And behind him, Brooke slid into the empty chair. My chair, the one I'd walked across the room to reach, and settled into it, like she'd been waiting for this moment. It's okay, Dad, she said, resting her hand on his arm. She can't hurt you anymore. 80 people, colleagues who'd known my dad for decades, family friends, the company VP. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Forks hovered. Conversations died mid-syllable. The entire room held its breath and chose silence. I sat on that floor and felt the cold hardwood through the fabric of my mother's dress. The torn hem pooled around my knee. My clutch had fallen open beside me, and there, half spilled onto the floor, was a photograph. Me at 5 years old, sitting on my dad's shoulders at one of his construction sites. Hard hat on my head, grinning so wide my eyes disappeared. He was laughing. I carried that photo everywhere. I didn't cry. I stared up at the man who taught me how buildings stand, and I saw something terrible in his face. Certainty. He was certain he was right. Victoria had spent 3 years making sure of that. I put my palms flat on the floor and started to push myself up. One step from the door. That's how close I was to walking out of that room and never coming back. Then I heard a chair push back, and it wasn't mine. It was Marcus. I was still on one knee when Marcus stood up from our corner table. He didn't rush. He buttoned his suit jacket, a single precise motion, and adjusted his cuffs. I'd seen him do that 100 times before presentations at his firm. It was his tell. It meant he was about to lay something out in a way that left no room for argument. Victoria noticed him first. I watched her eyes track his movement across the room, and something flickered behind her expression. The briefest crack of alarm, filled in immediately with a hostess smile. Marcus, she called out, her voice pitched for the room to hear. I think it's best if you take Heather home. She's had a long night. Marcus didn't look at her. He walked past the center tables, past Phil, past the murmuring guests who couldn't decide whether to stare or pretend nothing was happening. He walked straight to me and offered his hand. I took it. He pulled me up. He looked at the torn hem of Mom's dress, and his jaw tightened, and for 1 second, I saw something cross his face that wasn't calm at all. He set it aside. He steadied me, then turned toward the head table, toward my father. Mr. Purcell. His voice was conversational. Not loud, not aggressive. The tone you'd use in a conference room, not a confrontation, but every syllable carried. I'm Marcus, your daughter's husband. The daughter you just pushed to the floor. Richard's face reddened. I don't have anything to say to you. Take her and leave. I understand, sir, but before we go, I have one question. Marcus paused. When was the last time you personally picked up your phone and checked your messages? Richard blinked. What? It's a simple question, sir. Victoria stood up so fast her chair scraped the platform. Marcus, this is not the time or place. Actually, Mrs. Purcell, Marcus said, still looking at Richard. This is exactly the time and place. Okay, I need to pause here for a second, because at that moment, I was ready to leave. I was ready to let my father have the life Victoria had built around him. But Marcus had been sitting at that corner table, quiet the whole evening, holding something in his jacket pocket that nobody in the room knew about. Something that would change everything. Before I tell you what happened next, if this story has hit you've ever had someone stand up for you when nobody else would, now let me tell you what Marcus did. While Marcus stood at the head table, Victoria's recovery was almost beautiful in its precision. She turned to the room, palms open, voice warm and apologetic, the gracious hostess managing an unfortunate scene. Everyone, I'm so sorry about this disruption. Please, enjoy your dinners. This is Richard's night. She placed her hand on Dad's shoulder and leaned down. The table microphone caught her whisper. See? I told you she only comes around when she wants something. Dad nodded, but his hand was gripping his napkin hard enough to whiten his knuckles. He'd just shoved his daughter in front of every colleague he'd ever respected. I could see the adrenaline draining out of him, leaving behind something that looked a lot like doubt. Brooke filled the silence. She leaned into Richard and said, loudly enough for the surrounding tables, I'm here, Dad. I'll always be here. She rubbed his arm, and a few guests offered sympathetic smiles in their direction, the dutiful daughter comforting the beleaguered father. The narrative was holding. From her seat near the back, Donna Webb, a silver-haired woman I'd never met, watched the entire scene with an expression I couldn't read at the time. She caught Marcus's eye across the room and gave a small, deliberate nod. I didn't understand what it meant. I would soon. Phil, the gray-haired colleague who'd spoken to me earlier, broke the hush at his table. That was wrong, Rick. His voice was low but firm. That girl drove 4 hours to be here. Dad didn't answer. Victoria pressed on, lifting her champagne glass. To Richard, and to the family that chose to stay. A scattering of glasses rose, polite, uncomfortable. The kind of toast people drink to because refusing would require a courage nobody in that room had summoned yet. Nobody except Marcus. Victoria stepped down from the platform and crossed the room toward me. She moved with the precision of someone who has rehearsed their exits. Chin up, smile set, heels clicking a clean rhythm on the hardwood. She stopped 3 feet from where I stood near the coat check, smoothed her Hermes scarf, and lowered her voice. Heather, sweetie, I think it's best if you leave quietly. You've already embarrassed your father enough for one evening. I embarrassed him? He pushed me to the floor. Because you showed up uninvited to a private family event. If you really loved your father, you would have respected his wishes. His wishes? Or yours? Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes went flat. Let me be very clear. Richard has made his decision. His retirement, his benefits, his house, everything is taken care of. You are not part of that plan. She paused, adjusting her tone the way you'd adjust a thermostat, carefully, precisely. Walk away gracefully, or I will make sure everyone here knows exactly what kind of daughter you've been." I should have walked away. Every rational bone in my body told me to turn around, get in the car, and drive 4 hours home. But something she'd said, his benefits, his house, everything is taken care of, landed wrong. It sounded less like a wife protecting her husband and more like an investor protecting a portfolio. "What kind of daughter calls her father every week for 3 years and never gets an answer?" I said. Victoria's face changed. It was fast, a half second of something raw and startled, and then the mask slid back into place. "I don't know what you're talking about." But I'd seen it. That micro expression. That flinch. She knew about the calls. She'd known the entire time. Marcus had been watching from the center of the room. I didn't know it then, but he'd been waiting for this exact moment. The point where Victoria would overplay her hand. He'd told me later that the plan was never to confront her. It was to confront my father. Victoria was just the obstacle. He walked toward the head table with the kind of unhurried pace that makes people stop chewing. Every step deliberate, hands at his sides. He passed Victoria without a glance and stopped directly in front of Richard. The room noticed. Conversations thinned. Forks paused. "Mr. Purcell," Marcus's voice was steady. "Before your wife called security, which I assume she's about to do, I'd like to ask you one more question." Richard glared. "I told you to leave. I heard you, and I will. Right after you answer this. When was the last time you personally reviewed your 401k beneficiary designations?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Richard's expression shifted from anger to confusion. "My beneficiary? What does that have to do with anything? When was the last time you checked?" "I don't know. Years ago. Victoria handles all the—" He stopped. "Victoria handles all the paperwork," Marcus finished for him. "I know she does." Victoria's heels were already clicking toward them. "Richard, don't engage. He's trying to confuse you. This is what they do. They manipulate." "Mrs. Purcell," Marcus said, and this time he did look at her. "You can stop. I already have the paperwork." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. It was thick, maybe 20 pages folded inside. He set it on the table in front of Richard with the same care you'd use to place a document in front of a judge. The room went quiet for the second time that evening. But this silence wasn't directed at me. Victoria recovered faster than I thought possible. She pivoted, physically and strategically, and placed herself between Marcus and Richard, her hand on her husband's arm, her body angled to block the manila envelope from his line of sight. "Richard, listen to me. They're trying to ruin your night. This is your retirement. 35 years, and they want to turn it into some kind of courtroom drama." She looked at the nearest guest with wide, wounded eyes. "I'm so sorry, everyone. Heather has always been difficult. We've tried everything." A few people at the surrounding tables shifted in their seats. One woman reached out and patted Victoria's arm. The narrative was tipping back in her direction. I stood near the coat check, watching Marcus hold his ground while Victoria performed the most convincing act of victimhood I'd ever seen. I felt the fight draining out of me. She was too good at this. Then I noticed something. Marcus had set the manila envelope on the table, and it had opened slightly from the weight of its contents. Inside, I could see 2 documents, forms of some kind, set side by side. Different fonts, different dates. I couldn't read the text from where I stood, but I recognized the layout. I'd seen beneficiary forms before, during our own life insurance paperwork. Marcus had been sitting at our kitchen table 2 weeks ago, comparing 2 documents late at night. When I asked what he was working on, he'd said, "Something for a case. I'm not sure yet. I need to verify it." He hadn't been working on a case. He'd been working on this. "Mr. Purcell," Marcus said quietly, "I'm not here to ruin your evening. I'm here because someone has been systematically dismantling your financial future, and you don't know it yet." Victoria's voice shot up. Richard, tell him to leave. Richard's hand hovered over the envelope. He hadn't opened it, but he hadn't pushed it away either. Even if any of this were true, Richard said slowly, what does Brooke have to do with my retirement account? She owes $180,000 from a failed startup, Marcus said. Did you know that? Richard's head swiveled toward Brooke. She was still seated in the chair she'd taken from me. Her face went pale. That's that's not true. He's lying, Dad. Of course he's lying, Victoria said, pressing closer to Richard's side. He's an accountant. They twist numbers for a living. Marcus didn't flinch. I'm a forensic accountant, actually. Checking numbers for accuracy is literally what I do for a living. I spend my days identifying when financial documents have been altered. He let that hang for a moment. Sir, can I show you what's in this envelope? That's all I'm asking. 60 seconds of your time. The room had gone so quiet I could hear the ice shifting in water glasses 3 tables away. Guests who'd been pretending to eat had given up the pretense. Everyone was watching. Richard stared at the envelope. Victoria stared at Richard. Brooke stared at the tablecloth. Even if Brooke has debt, Richard said, that's her business. What does it have to do with me? 8 months ago, Marcus said, someone submitted a change of beneficiary form on your 401k retirement account and your pension. The original form named Heather as your primary beneficiary at 50%. The new form names Brooke Ashford as sole beneficiary, 100%. Richard's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. That's impossible. I never signed any. I know you didn't, sir. Marcus opened the envelope and placed 2 forms on the white linen tablecloth, side by side. That's exactly the problem. Richard looked down at the papers. His face changed, slowly, like a man watching a house he built start to tilt on its foundation. The form on the left was dated 12 years ago. Beneficiary: Heather Purcell, 50%. Estate of Linda Purcell, 50%. The signature at the bottom was Richard's. The looping R, the heavy downstroke on the P, all of it unmistakable to anyone who'd watched him sign permission slips and birthday cards for 30 years. The form on the right was dated 8 months ago. Beneficiary: Brooke Ashford, 100%. And the signature. Richard picked up the second form. He held it close to his face, then pulled it back. His lips moved like he was sounding out letters. This isn't my signature. The R is wrong. I always loop the R. This one, this is straight. I've never written my R like that. I know, Marcus said. Victoria stepped forward. Richard, those documents are fabricated. Marcus printed them himself. You can't possibly. I've seen my own handwriting for 63 years, Victoria. His voice was different now, stripped of the anger he'd carried all evening, replaced by something thinner. Bewilderment. This is not my name. Brooke scraped her chair back and stood. Dad, they're setting us up. This is what Heather does. She manipulates. Sit down, Brooke. Richard didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He was still looking at the second form, turning it over in his hands like a man discovering termites in a beam he'd assumed was solid. Victoria tried one more angle. She softened her voice, almost tender. Richard, you signed those papers yourself. You just don't remember because you've been stressed about the transition. Retirement is overwhelming, honey. Your mind? My mind is fine. He set the form down, looked at Marcus, looked at Victoria, looked across the room at me, still standing near the coat check, still wearing my mother's torn dress. Then a chair pushed back from a table in the far corner of the room. Donna Webb rose to her feet. Donna Webb was 58 years old and had worked in benefits administration at Dad's company for 22 years. She was the kind of woman who wore sensible flats and reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she carried a leather folio everywhere because she believed in paper trails the way some people believe in prayer. She'd processed every benefits enrollment, every insurance claim, and every retirement form Richard Purcell had filed since he was 39 years old. She crossed the room without hurrying. Excuse me, she said. I think I need to add some context here. Victoria turned on her. Donna, this is a private family matter. It has nothing to do with. Ma'am, I've been Mr. Purcell's benefits coordinator for 22 years. When someone submits a change to an employee's retirement beneficiary using what appears to be an irregular signature, that's a company matter. The room sharpened. Guests who'd been wavering between sympathy for Victoria and curiosity about Marcus now sat up straighter. Donna opened her folio. 8 months ago, a change of beneficiary form was submitted for Mr. Purcell's 401k and pension accounts. It arrived via email, which is unusual because in 22 years, Mr. Purcell has never once submitted paperwork electronically. He always came to my office in person. Richard nodded slowly. That's right. I always came to you, Donna. I flagged the discrepancy with HR 2 months ago, Donna continued. The signature didn't match our records, and the email it was sent from was a personal Gmail account, not Mr. Purcell's company email. She paused. I reached out to Marcus because he's listed as Heather's emergency contact and next of kin. I thought the family should know. Victoria's voice went thin. You had no right. I had every obligation, Donna said calmly. I've watched this man build his retirement for 30 years. I wasn't going to watch someone dismantle it with a forged signature. Marcus reached into the envelope again. This time he pulled out a printout. Several pages stapled together. Rows and rows of dates, times, and phone numbers. Mr. Purcell, your wife told you that Heather never calls, that she turned her back on this family, that she didn't care. Marcus set the printout next to the beneficiary forms. These are Heather's phone records from the past 3 years, obtained directly from her carrier. 147 outgoing calls to your phone number, 42 text messages, every week, sometimes twice a week, for 36 consecutive months. Richard picked up the printout. His finger moved down the columns, call after call after call. The dates lined up like a drumbeat, every Sunday, almost without exception. That can't be right, he said. My phone never rang. I never saw. Check your phone, sir, Marcus said gently. Right now. Go to settings. Then blocked contacts. Richard reached into his pocket with the slow, deliberate motion of a man who already suspects what he'll find. He tapped the screen, navigated through the menus with the clumsy swipes of someone who'd never explored his own settings. He found the list. One number. Blocked. The area code matched the city where Heather and Marcus lived. Richard looked up from the phone. His eyes moved to Victoria, and for the first time all evening, I saw the man I remembered. The foreman who didn't tolerate sloppy work, who could spot a cracked weld from 30 feet away. The man who trusted what was in front of him over what anyone told him. You blocked her. His voice was barely above a whisper. You blocked my daughter. Victoria opened her mouth. Nothing came out. 147 calls. Richard's hands were shaking. She called me every single week. And you stood in this house and told me she didn't care. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. 147 calls said everything I never could. Victoria's mask didn't slip this time. It shattered. She dropped the Wounded Wife Act, and the Gracious Hostess Act, and the I'm Just Protecting This Family Act, and what came through was raw, cornered fury. Fine. Yes. I blocked her number. Because Heather was toxic, Richard. She was trying to control you. She was trying to control you. She was trying to turn you against me and Brooke, and I was protecting this family from. She was my daughter. Richard's voice broke on the word. Not a shout. Something worse. A crack running through concrete. Victoria charged forward. She was a grown woman who refused to accept that you had a new life. Every time she called, you got confused. You got sad. You started asking questions about Linda, about the old house, about things I'd spent years helping you move past. Helping me move past my dead wife? Helping you heal. Brooke tried to intervene. Mom, stop. Just stop. Victoria wheeled on her own daughter with a ferocity that made Brooke flinch. Don't you dare. Everything I did, every single thing, was for you. Because your father left us with nothing, and I had to make sure that. She caught herself. But the sentence was already out there, hanging in the air like smoke. Richard stared at her. Had to make sure that what, Victoria? That Brooke would be taken care of. Victoria's voice dropped. The fight went out of her as quickly as it had ignited. Brooke's father abandoned us. He left us with debt and nothing else. And Brooke's company failed, and she owes more than she'll ever. I had to think about her future. I had to. So you stole mine, Richard said quietly. I redirected it. For our family. Our family. Richard repeated the words like he was tasting something spoiled. You erased my daughter, forged my name, and looted my retirement fund, and you call that family. Victoria had no answer for that. For the first time in 16 years, she had no answer at all. Aunt Janet stood up from the back of the room. She didn't rush, didn't raise her voice. She just walked to the center of the room and faced her brother with the steady expression of a woman who'd been waiting a very long time to say what came next. Richard, I've been trying to tell you this for years. Richard turned to her, and I could see the exhaustion settling into his shoulders. The posture of a man who'd spent the last 10 minutes discovering that the floor he'd been standing on was rotten. I watched Victoria shut Heather out of this family piece by piece, Janet said. The photographs, the phone calls, the holiday invitations that somehow never reached her. I came to you 5 separate times and told you something was wrong, and every time you said the same thing. Janet, you just don't like Victoria. Stay out of it. No, Richard. You pushed your daughter to the floor tonight, in front of every person you've worked with for 35 years. You need to sit with that. Phil nodded from his table. A few others did too. The kind of quiet, weighted nods that don't need words. Richard lowered himself back into his chair at the head table. He set his phone on the linen cloth, screen still showing the blocked contacts list. His hand rested on the printout of phone records. 147 calls mapped in black and white. The Cartier watch glinted under the chandelier. He didn't look at Victoria. He didn't look at Brooke. He looked at the empty space in front of him. The space where the retirement speech should have lived, where the champagne toasts and the proud family portrait should have happened. All of it gone, replaced by paper trails and silence. Janet's voice carried across the still room. I loved you enough to keep trying, Richard, but Heather loved you enough to call 147 times when you never picked up. Think about which one of us gave up. At that point, my father was sitting in the same chair he'd pushed me away from, staring at his phone like he was seeing it for the first time. And honestly, part of me wanted to walk away right then, let him sort through the wreckage on his own. But that's the thing about family. The people who hurt you the deepest are the ones whose apology would mean the most. So what happened next? Did Richard finally see it all clearly? Or did Victoria find one last lie to save herself? Stay with me. Richard stood up from the head table. He moved slowly, like someone walking through water, fighting current with every step. He stepped off the platform and crossed the ballroom floor. Victoria called after him. Richard, where are you going? Richard! He didn't turn around. 80 people watched my 63-year-old father walk the length of that room, past the tables of colleagues, past the champagne flutes and the linen napkins and the framed portrait of himself shaking hands with the CEO, past all of it. He stopped in front of me. We stood 3 feet apart, close enough to touch, close enough for me to see the vein pulsing at his temple and the shine in his eyes that he was fighting to control. His gaze dropped to my dress, the torn hem, the navy silk, the boat neck my mother had picked out 20 years ago. That's your mother's dress, he said. Yes. You wore your mother's dress, to my party. I wore it for you, Dad, because Mom would have wanted to be here tonight. Something broke behind his face, not all at once, not a clean fracture, more like a dam that had been leaking for years, finally giving way at the center. He looked down at his own hands, the same hands that had pushed me to that floor 20 minutes earlier. I pushed you, he said. Yes. In front of everyone. Yes. He looked at the Cartier watch on his wrist. Then he looked at me. And whatever Victoria had spent 3 years whispering into his ear. Heather doesn't care. Heather chose to leave. Heather isn't your family anymore. I watched all of it drain out of his expression like water through a cracked foundation. He opened his mouth, and for the first time in 3 years, the words that came out were his own. Heather, I. He stopped, swallowed, tried again. I don't know how to say this. I waited. I didn't help him find the words. That might sound cold, but I'd spent 3 years calling a phone that never rang. I wasn't going to make this easy. He owed me the effort of finding the right words himself. I believed everything she told me, he said. Every word. Because it was easier than admitting I was losing you, and I didn't know how to stop it. He paused. After your mother died, I didn't know how to be a father on my own. Victoria made it simple. She handled everything. And I let her, because handling things myself meant facing how badly I was failing at all of it. He turned back toward the room. 80 faces stared back at him. I owe my daughter an apology, he said, loud enough for the back tables. Not just for tonight, for 3 years. I let someone convince me that the one person who never stopped reaching out to me had given up on me. That's on me. Victoria lied. But I chose to believe her, because the lie was more comfortable than the truth. He faced me again. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I pushed you. I'm sorry I didn't answer your calls. I'm sorry I let them take your mother's pictures off the wall. My throat was tight. My eyes burned. But I didn't collapse into him. I didn't throw my arms around his neck and tell him everything was fine. I accept your apology, Dad. But accepting an apology and trusting you again are two very different things. We have a long way to go. He nodded, slowly. I know. Good. Then this is where we start, not where we finish. He nodded again, and the smallest thing shifted, like a load recentering on a beam that had been off balance for years. Victoria was not finished. She marched across the floor with the rigid posture of a woman whose entire architecture was collapsing and who refused to acknowledge gravity. She positioned herself between Richard and me and addressed the room. Can't anyone see what's happening? Marcus and Heather planned this entire spectacle. They came here tonight to humiliate Richard at his own retirement. This is coordinated. This is an attack. Richard spoke without turning to face her. No, Victoria. The only person who planned anything at this party was you, the seating chart, the slideshow with no pictures of Heather, no pictures of Linda. You choreographed everything tonight to make sure my daughter felt invisible. And it worked. Until it didn't. Victoria pivoted to the guests. She scanned the room for allies, for one sympathetic face, for anyone who would corroborate the narrative she'd maintained for 16 years. What she found instead were averted gazes and tight jaws and hands wrapped around water glasses. Phil spoke up. Ma'am, the man just showed us a forged signature. Sit down. Victoria turned to Brooke, the last person left in her corner. Brooke was standing at the edge of the platform, clutching her small handbag with both hands, her face drained of color. Brooke, tell them. Tell them this is all a misunderstanding. Brooke's mouth opened, closed. She looked at Richard. She looked at the beneficiary forms still spread on the linen tablecloth. She looked at me, standing in my mother's torn dress. Mom, Brooke said quietly, it's over. Something in Victoria's expression went hollow. The fight left her face like air leaving a tire. Not dramatically, not with a bang, just a slow, steady deflation. It is not over, she whispered. But she was the only person in the room who still believed that. Brooke gathered her things from the head table. She moved mechanically. Clutch, phone, the cashmere wrap Victoria had draped over her chair. She didn't look at the beneficiary forms. She didn't look at the blocked contacts list still glowing on Richard's phone. She walked off the platform and headed for the door, but she stopped in front of me. I didn't know about the signature, she said. Her voice was thin. I swear to you, Heather, I didn't know she forged his name. But you knew about the phone, I said. You knew I was calling. You knew I was being blocked. Brooke didn't answer right away, and that silence, 3 seconds, maybe four, carried more honesty than anything Victoria had said all evening. I wanted a dad, Brooke finally said. Her eyes were wet. My real father left when I was 6, moved to Portland with his girlfriend and never looked back. Richard was the first person who ever, her voice cracked. He made me feel like I mattered. I understood that. I understood it completely. And understanding it didn't make me less angry, but it made my anger more precise. I understand wanting a father, Brooke, but you don't get one by erasing someone else's daughter. She held my gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded, a small, tight movement, and walked toward the exit. Victoria called after her, sharp and desperate. Brooke! Brooke! Brooke pushed through the double doors and didn't look back. Around the room, a shift was happening. The slow, collective exhale of 80 people processing what they'd just witnessed. A few of Richard's colleagues stood up and drifted toward him. Handshakes, quiet words. Donna moved to Marcus's side and nodded once, the kind of nod that meant the job is done. I didn't hate Brooke. I hated what she'd allowed to happen. There's a difference. And it was one she'd have to sort out on her own. Victoria stood alone at the head table. The chair beside her was empty. Brooke's seat. The chair on the other side was empty. Richard's. The linen tablecloth still held the 2 beneficiary forms, the phone records, the remains of a celebration that had turned into something else entirely. Richard faced her from across the room. Victoria, I think you should go home. This is my party too, Richard. No, this was supposed to be my retirement, 35 years of my life, and you turned it into a stage for your scheme. Go home, we'll talk tomorrow, with a lawyer present. Victoria picked up her clutch, a Chanel bag, black quilted leather with gold hardware. She adjusted the Hermes scarf around her neck. She drew herself up to her full height and surveyed the room one last time. 80 people who'd spent the evening watching her performance unravel, stitch by stitch. She walked toward the exit. Her heels struck the hardwood in a slow, measured rhythm, the only sound in the entire ballroom. At the door, she stopped and turned back. She looked directly at me. Not at Richard, not at Marcus. At me. There was no pretense left. No warmth, no strategy, no practiced grief. Just fury. Pure, unfiltered, 16 years in the making fury. I looked back at her. I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. After 3 years of silence, I'd gotten very good at it. The door closed behind her. The room released a breath it had been holding for an hour. Conversations stirred, tentative and low. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed nervously. The world began to rotate again. Richard stood at the center of the room, looking at the empty head table, at the empty chairs. Then he looked at me. That seat was always yours, Heather. I just forgot. He didn't offer me the chair. He pulled it out for me. And for the first time in 3 years, I sat next to my father. The rest of the party dissolved slowly. Guests said their goodbyes. Some shook Richard's hand and didn't mention what had happened, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. Others, Phil, a few of the older supervisors, clasped his arm and said things like, "You've still got people who care about you, Rick." Richard nodded at each one, but his eyes kept drifting back to the 2 forms on the table, as if staring at them long enough might undo what they represented. After the last guests filed out, Donna approached us. She'd waited deliberately. She was a woman who understood the difference between urgency and timing. "Mr. Purcell," she said, "given what was presented tonight, I'll need to file a formal report with HR and legal first thing Monday morning. Your beneficiary designations will be frozen pending an internal investigation. No changes, no withdrawals, no distributions until we've verified the chain of custody on every document." Richard nodded. "Do what you need to do, Donna. And thank you. You didn't have to come forward like that." "Yes, I did." She closed her folio. "I also pulled the email submission logs before tonight. The beneficiary change was sent from a personal Gmail address. The IP address traces back to a residential location. Your home, Mr. Purcell." And this isn't the first irregularity. 2 years ago, a request was submitted to add Brooke Ashford as a beneficiary on your company life insurance policy. I rejected it because she doesn't qualify as a legal dependent. Richard closed his eyes. 2 years. Victoria had been working on this for at least 2 years, and he'd never known. Marcus stood beside me. Your 401k and pension, together, they're worth roughly $420,000. If the forms had gone through unchallenged, you would have retired with nothing in your name. Everything I earned, Richard said quietly. 35 years. Every cent of it, Marcus confirmed, would have gone to Brooke Ashford the day you filed your final paperwork. Marcus and I drove home in the dark. The highway was empty. Fields slid past outside the windows like dark water, and neither of us spoke for the first 20 miles. I looked down at Mom's dress. The hem was torn from where I'd hit the floor. A thread hung loose near the knee. I ran my thumb over it and thought about how some things can be mended and some things can only be worn with the damage showing. You knew, I said, before tonight. I knew for 2 weeks. Donna called me 2 months ago with her concerns. I spent the rest of the time pulling records, verifying signatures, cross-referencing the submission logs with the company's internal audit trail. I needed every piece to be airtight before I brought it to your father. Why didn't you tell me? Marcus kept his eyes on the road. Because if I'd been wrong, if the signature discrepancy turned out to be a clerical error, or if Donna's suspicions didn't hold up, I would have been another person making promises about your father that fell apart. You've had enough of that. I wasn't going to give you hope I couldn't back up with documentation. I understood. That was Marcus. He didn't deal in feelings. He dealt in verified facts. And he'd loved me enough to wait until the facts were solid. There's one more thing, he said. When I was going through the phone records, I found something. 3 years ago, Christmas Eve, the night you left that voicemail. You also sent a text. I remembered. Merry Christmas, Dad. I'm sorry I can't make it. I love you. It was delivered, and it was read. The carrier's red receipt shows it was opened at 11:47 p.m., Christmas Eve. My chest tightened. He saw it? Someone saw it. Marcus paused, and then deleted it, and blocked your number the next morning. Victoria had read my Christmas message to my father. She'd seen the words, I love you, Dad, and erased them. 1 week later, the pieces started falling into place, slowly, unevenly, the way things do in real life when there's no editor trimming the awkward parts. HR completed its preliminary investigation by Wednesday. The second beneficiary form was confirmed as fraudulent. The signature analysis didn't match company records, and the submitting email address was linked to an account registered under Victoria's maiden name. Richard's original beneficiary designations were restored. Heather Purcell, 50%. Estate of Linda Purcell, 50%. The way Dad had written it 12 years ago. The way it should have stayed. Richard met with a divorce attorney on Thursday. Victoria had already moved most of her personal belongings out of the house by then. She'd done it while Richard was at a follow-up meeting at the plant. No conversation, no negotiation, just empty drawers and a closet stripped of Hermes and Chanel. Brooke sent me an email on Friday. 2 lines. You were right about the phone. I should have said something. I read it 3 times. I didn't respond. Not because I was punishing her, but because I hadn't figured out what honest words looked like yet. She deserved a real answer, and I wasn't ready to give one. Richard called me Saturday morning. The first phone call from my father in 3 years. We sat in silence for the first 10 seconds, the kind of silence that used to fill our kitchen after Mom died, full and heavy and strangely familiar. I don't know how to fix this, he said. You don't fix it in one phone call, Dad. But this call, right now, is a start. I heard him exhale, long and shaky. Then, I'm wearing the Timex. The watch I'd bought him with my first summer job paycheck when I was 16, a $30 Timex from a display case at Walmart. I didn't know he'd kept it. Good, I said. That's a start too. 2 weeks after the party, I pulled into my father's driveway for the first time in 3 years. Marcus waited in the car. Take your time, he said. I'll be here. The front door was unlocked. I stepped inside and the house smelled different. Not bad, just different. Victoria's candles were gone. The ornamental grasses she'd planted were still in the yard, but someone had set a single pot of black-eyed Susans on the porch railing. Mom's flower. Dad must have bought them at the nursery. The marble dining table was gone. In its place, in the middle of the kitchen, sitting on the same scuffed tile floor I'd walked on as a kid, was the oak table. Dad had pulled it from the garage, sanded it down, and refinished it. The grain was darker now, seasoned by years of storage. But the joints were tight and the legs were level, and when I ran my hand across the surface, I could feel the grooves from 1,000 family dinners. I found my chair, the one with my initials carved into the back, HP, scratched in with a pocket knife by a man who wanted his daughter's name in the wood so she'd always know where she belonged. The chair wobbled slightly. Dad had re-glued the leg, but the joint wasn't perfect. Some of the scratches won't come out, Dad said from the kitchen doorway. That's okay, Dad. Neither will some of mine. He poured 2 cups of coffee in plain ceramic mugs. No Wedgwood china, no marble. Just 2 cups on an oak table in a kitchen that was starting to remember what it used to be. On the wall behind him, a framed photograph of my mother, Linda Purcell, smiling, back where she belonged. I glanced at Dad's phone, resting on the table. The screen was unlocked. I could see the settings app open. Blocked contacts. The list was empty. He'd figured it out himself. We didn't talk about everything that afternoon. We didn't need to. Sometimes sitting at the same table is enough. People ask me if I've forgiven my father. The honest answer is that forgiveness isn't a switch I flipped. It's more like physical therapy, repetitive, uncomfortable, and measured in millimeters instead of miles. Some days I wake up and I'm fine. Some days I remember the floor, the hardwood, the sound of my mother's dress tearing. And I have to decide all over again whether I'm going to carry that or set it down. I'm working on it. Every day. Here's what I've learned. And I'm telling you this not as advice, but as something I had to figure out the hard way. Forgiving someone doesn't mean you pretend it didn't happen. It means you stop letting their worst moment dictate every moment that comes after. My father pushed me. He called me not his real daughter in front of 80 people. Those things happened, and they'll always have happened. But they're not the entire story. They're the chapter that almost ended us, but didn't. Victoria. I don't hate her. I've tried to, and I can't sustain it. She was a woman who watched her first husband abandon her and her daughter, and she swore she'd never let that happen again. Her method was wrong. Her execution was criminal. But the fear underneath it, the fear of being left with nothing, I understand that fear. I just refuse to let it excuse what she did. Marcus didn't save me that night. I want to be clear about that. He gave me the truth. Donna gave him the paperwork. Janet gave Richard the mirror. But I saved myself by choosing to show up at that party, in my mother's dress, after 3 years of silence. I could have stayed home. I almost did. My biggest weakness was my pride. I was so determined not to beg for my father's attention that I let 3 years pass without fighting for him. Pride kept my dignity intact, sure, but it also kept me away from the truth. 1 month after the party, Dad and I went to lunch, just the 2 of us. No Marcus, no Janet, no buffer. A diner on Route 35, the same one he used to take me to on Saturday mornings before we'd drive out to whatever construction site he was supervising that week. Red vinyl booths, laminated menus, coffee in ceramic mugs with the diner's logo wearing off. He was wearing the Timex. The crystal was scratched. The leather band was cracked at the edges and held together with a replacement pin I could tell he'd bought at a hardware store. But the second hand still ticked. You kept it, I said. It was in my dresser drawer, under the Cartier box. He turned the watch over in his hand. I think I always knew which one meant more. We ordered the same thing, 2 fried egg sandwiches and black coffee, the way we used to when I was 10, and pretending to like coffee because he drank it. We talked about small things, the weather, a new bridge project I was consulting on in Virginia, his plans for retirement, actual plans now, not the ones Victoria had engineered. He wanted to build furniture again, maybe refinish the porch. He didn't mention Victoria. I didn't push. Near the end of the meal, he set down his fork and looked at me with the focused attention of a man who'd spent a month rehearsing a sentence. Your mom would have been proud of you, Heather. She would have been proud of you too, Dad, for waking up. He nodded, picked up his coffee, took a sip, and we sat there in a vinyl booth in a diner that hadn't been renovated since the 90s, drinking bad coffee, and it was the best meal I'd had in years. The most expensive watch in the world can't buy back the time you've wasted, but a $30 Timex can remind you to stop wasting what's left. Here's where everyone ended up. Victoria. The divorce finalized 4 months later. Under Ohio law, assets obtained through fraud aren't subject to equitable division, so she received no portion of Richard's retirement fund. The company's legal team referred the forged beneficiary form to local authorities. Whether charges would be filed was still pending when I recorded this. Victoria moved in with her sister in Columbus. I haven't spoken to her since the party, and I don't plan to. Brooke. She's paying down her startup debt on a structured repayment plan. No safety net from Richard, no redirected pension, no shortcuts. She sent me a second email about 2 months after the first. It was longer. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She described what it was like growing up without a father, and how that loneliness made her willing to look the other way when her mother crossed lines. I read it. I still haven't replied. I'm not sure I will. But I kept it. Donna Webb. She retired the same quarter as Richard. HR gave her a commendation for identifying the beneficiary irregularity. The official language was exemplary diligence in protecting employee retirement assets. She and Dad still talk. She sends him articles about 401k management that he pretends to read. Richard. My dad joined a support group for people who've experienced financial manipulation by family members. He goes every other Tuesday. He's also learning how to use his smartphone, really use it. He can check his blocked contacts list, read his own text messages, and even video call. He's terrible at it. The camera's always pointed at his forehead. I don't correct him. Marcus. Still a forensic accountant. Still checks every number twice. Still the steadiest person I've ever met. And the oak table in Dad's kitchen has 4 chairs now. Richard, Heather, Marcus, Janet. Not 3, not 5. Just enough for the people who chose to stay, not the ones who stayed to take. If you're listening to this and you recognize something, the silence, the blocked calls, the seat that was taken away from you, I want you to know something. You're not invisible. You were just in a room full of people who chose not to look. Don't wait 3 years like I did. Don't let your pride or your self-respect harden into an excuse to stop reaching for the people who matter. I told myself I was being strong by not begging. I told myself I was preserving my dignity. What I was really doing was giving Victoria 3 uncontested years to rewrite my father's reality. My silence didn't protect me. It protected her. But I'll say this too, because it's just as important. Don't fight for people who've shown you they don't deserve the fight. Know the difference. There's a line between loyalty and self-destruction, and you're the only person who can draw it. My father made a terrible mistake. He made it because a woman lied to him every day for 3 years, and he was too exhausted and too afraid of being alone to question it. That doesn't excuse him, but it explains him. And sometimes understanding why someone hurt you is the first step toward deciding whether they've earned another chance. I didn't get a perfect ending. I got a starting point. A kitchen table with 4 chairs and a pot of black-eyed Susans on the porch. A father who answers his phone now. A husband who fights with paperwork instead of fists. An aunt who never stopped knocking on the door. My name is Heather Purcell. I'm 31 years old. I'm a structural engineer, and I build things that are designed to stand, even when the ground shakes beneath them. On Dad's oak table, next to the framed photo of Mom, there's a snapshot of me at 5 years old, sitting on his shoulders at one of his construction sites, wearing a hard hat 3 sizes too big, grinning so wide my eyes disappear. He's laughing. I carry that photo everywhere. Now it stays on the table, right where it belongs. That's the end of my story. But before you go, I want to ask you something. If you could go back and say one thing, just one honest thing, to the family member who hurt you the most, what would it be? Not to fix it, just to say your truth. If this story made you feel a little less alone tonight, that's everything I could have hoped for. There's another story linked in the description that hit me just as hard to tell. I think you'll understand why once you hear it. Thank you for staying until the